This episode of Talk Your Book is proudly brought to you by Honan, providing a complete range of insurance, risk and financial solutions.
Fundies called me up, told me to take a look, but stay stubborn as bulls and talk their own book. Get the money, get the money, get the money.
Hi, I'm Chris Judd and you're watching Talk Your Book, and today we're joined by Brad King from Armitage Private. Brad, very first guest for 2023. Thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And what stock did you want to get into today?
Yeah, we're going to go straight into commodities because we've come out of a macro year of a bit of a change in where the commodity guard has gone from your bulks to more your lithiums, your different types of metals, and I think people are starting to, pardon the pun, dig a little deeper into some different opportunities. So, going to look at Elementos today.
Now, full disclosure, I'm on the Elementos register in a small way alongside you. So maybe give us the helicopter view of Elementos for those that haven't heard of it. Yeah,
basically Elementos, I think tin's probably much maligned or much misunderstood in terms of what it's actually used for, but think of tin as mostly in your solder. So when you look at your semiconductor markets, that's sort of where we're looking for. So the number of sensors on an electric vehicle car, obviously your computers, your personal devices, and even things like your toaster or whatever have these type of chips that provide some sort of, I suppose, transmission network of data. So really looking forward to seeing that supply grow over time. Having said that, we got a major disruption through COVID and some oversupply and shortages on that semiconductor network, but we expect that to normalise over time.
One of the things I like about tin is that it's really just not spoken about that much. We know that electrification of everything is such an enormous macro theme at the minute, and people are always talking about, copper, nickel, cobalt, lithium, graphite. Rarely do you hear tin mentioned in the same sentence, yet as you went through there, it's sort of it's been described as a glue, if you like, for the electrification of all the things that we need.
I think because the usage of it is so small that you don't think of it. So like when you're talking about 7 times the copper input into an electric car versus an internal combustion engine, you think of that as a great volume, whereas tin might be, a cent here, another cent, another cent, another cent, but over billions of applications, obviously that adds up.
And so give us a bit of an overview of the tin market currently.
Yeah, so very opaque in terms of where it sort of trades and how it trades. But 24% is controlled by China. And then, you have to go into your ESG non-friendlies for perhaps some of the others. So your Democratic Republics of Congo, Russia, even Indonesia to a lesser extent. And they've talked about doing export bans at some point in time in 2024 as well. So you really have these volatile markets where the traditional home in Malaysia, they've wound down all their tin suppliers effectively. But the new stocks where you have to dig are in markets that probably aren't going to tick too many ESG boxes.
And how low are the stockpiles at their LME and SHFE currently?
Yeah, they've started to build it back up a little bit, but you just see how quickly that can change. Like you were sort of looking for a 3-month supply, and then you sort of almost went negative when the price of tin went up to sort of 51,000 last year, and then it sort of reverted as I suppose that semiconductor oversupply sort of restored itself while those COVID lack of, shipping channels had slowed down. And then it sort of fell to that sort of 17,000 bottom. But we're still looking at within just months of supply at the tops. We don't think it can grow higher than that. So I think tin for a commodity that's used in such a small application is going to be very volatile in the way it sort of trades. And China's been a net importer of tin as well. So that really moves the market if they decide to be aggressive.
And the forecasts that sort of get put out there for demand to grow by a bit over 3% and supply to be growing a bit over 1%. Are they the sort of numbers that you're seeing?
Yeah, definitely. I think they're fairly conservative. I personally think if you get a rollout that's more fast in terms of the electronic vehicles, then you might see that sort of accelerate a little bit higher into the mid-single digits. But that 1% supply increase, that's not really going to change much. And even if you bring on an Orpeza or that's the mine for Elementos or any other projects, you're still really not making a dent as you're only really chewing into the supply that's coming off.
And you mentioned the potential for Indonesian export restrictions. We also had the San Rafael mine in Peru closed down, which I think is sort of 12% of the market.
Yep.
Just how significant is that? And maybe touch on, maybe Myanmar, I think, is the fourth biggest exporter as well. There's it's a hotbed everywhere of issues with the countries that seem to be producing the most amount of tin.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would like to get more LME or Shanghai futures inventory, but it's just difficult to get. And yeah, obviously with Peru going down, and we've seen that with the copper markets as well with South America, you do see that sort of disruption. But it's very difficult to sort of back solve that for tin. So I think what's going to happen is you're just going to see more activity in the futures market trying to shore up supply, but that's going to give you more volatility in the underlying commodity price.
And maybe give us the top-down view of the Oropesa project, Elementos' main project in Spain.
Yeah, so Spain has typically been a tricky market in Europe for I suppose developing mining provinces, but Andalusian province is quite renowned and has a good history and track record of getting these approved. I think the fact that the mine has been considered of state significance, that really gives it an acceleration through the appeals process and through the environmental impact statements that perhaps another mine wouldn't receive. So that sort of accelerated their time frame, but yeah, it looks like a fairly simple mine. We're not talking billions or hundreds of millions of capex, sort of sub 100 million exploration and development of the mine market capex. So we really think that's affordable, and the fact that they've sort of had 6 EPC contractors look at bidding into the process means that it's a fairly cost competitive project.
Being given that sort of project of state significance title, if you look at the other mining companies that have received that, I think Rio Tinto's on the list. It's not sort of other $50 million market cap companies, is it? It's generally companies that are far more significant in scale than Elementos.
Yeah, sure. And I think the region just sort of sees that as an opportunity to really grow I suppose a foothold or a dominant position in a metal that perhaps they would never have probably dreamed of being in that regard, because they don't really control any of the world's other commodities. So for them to have a decent control of the tin market, I think would be a positive for Spain.
And DFS is due, we think, sort of the middle of 2023 calendar year. Does that sort of feel realistic at your end?
Yeah, it looks like that, but we'll probably see some slippage to the final approval towards the end of the year and maybe into early 24, but confident that it gets there, and a couple of months here or there is not really in our minds of anything that changes a valuation perspective. It may impact the amount of cash needed or for a short-term period, but yeah, still positive that because it's on that fast track, it gets there. It did get interrupted by some Spanish elections late last year, so that did slow it down a little bit, but we think the momentum's there to sort of get it done.
And you mentioned it looks sort of relatively simple in terms of the scale of the project. Maybe touch on, ELT's market cap, but the numbers that got presented in the optimisation study, just give people a feel of what the potential is there for Oropesa.
Yeah, so they're trying to basically create it from an inferred resource and upgrade that resource. So if we look at sort of where we think the mine can get to, which is sort of a 14-year-old mine life, then if you sort of use 40,000 a tonne, you're sort of looking at a $600 million project, and based on that's from a net present value valuation. So given the market cap's only 60, that gives you some significant upside. But our view, and I think that's our view, sort of consistent with the International Tin Association, that you will see some improvement in that sort of, I suppose, floor of the tin price. That the upside could be far more significant.
And I think the capex numbers in that study, they're throwing around sort of mid-80 million mark, and sort of a 1.5 year build once final approval's given, which when you're 50 mil market cap, those sort of numbers feel like they can actually be done. You always get nervous when you see capex spend of $600 million on a $50 million market cap company. Is that sort of how you read it as well?
Yeah, so 86 is sort of what they're looking for. But again, because they've got 6 people bidding for it, we're confident that that's going to be fairly tight. So it might be within a few, maybe 5 or 10% either way. But yeah, exactly, you're not talking major capex requirements.
And so you've got potential approvals, offtake, financing could all happen sort of late 23, early 24 sort of period. So you've got a fair few potential re-rates in the next, call it 12 to 18 months. Mm-hmm. $4 million of cash, so clearly they're going to be raising pretty soon. Do you think the market needs to see that before they'll start at least correlating ELT with the tin price? Because at the minute tin's been ripping and it's strengthened, but you wouldn't say the correlation's been overly strong.
Yeah, I think definitely capital's been an overhang on why it hasn't had that correlation with it on the upside. But they might do something that gives them the ability to raise into. So they've got some pretty good news coming out, I suppose, from those infill drilling results, and then also potential offtake partners or potential debt financing partners. So if they can, I suppose, use the raise into a deal like that, or a cornerstone investor or someone like that gives it a bit more strategic nature about it, I think that's what they'll be looking to do. And it might surprise people that if they don't get in, they might actually miss out on the raise.
And the Cleveland Tin project in Tasmania, obviously much smaller than Armitage and less of a focus.
Yep.
Is that just a bit of a side project at the minute, or do you think that's something where they'll punch significant capital in the future?
There's definitely value there, but yeah, certainly not front and mind for the next probably 18 months. But yeah, look, if they raise a significant amount of money, I'm sure they'll keep the geos going. They'll keep doing some drill holes. There's quite a lot of water in it, so they need to dewater it. So they would need to make a fundamental decision on tin and how much tungsten is potentially below that, to whether getting that water out is worth it.
And MLX, the more significant tin operator on the ASX,
yep.
Have a shared board member with ELT.
Yep.
Could you see a world where those two companies potentially created a tie-up and creating a more significant company, obviously expanding the resource for MLX and giving some more liquidity to ELT shareholders? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I think the best outcome would be they just work together and try and promote the tin industry in Australia. But yeah, there's definitely a spot where they could go, hey, if we can look at these different projects around the world and start to develop them, and we can create a little tin monopoly in Australia. That'd be great. But yeah, look, I can't change the minds of the boardroom, but yeah, that'd be nice to see a bigger player, better balance sheet, I suppose more the ability to raise debt and use capital, but it's up to them.
And before I let you go, maybe tell us a little bit about Armitage Private and where people can find some more info about how you guys invest.
Yeah, sure. So Armitage has been around since 1995. We focus on individually managed accounts and self-managed super funds mostly. We have a couple of retail funds as well, but predominantly Oz equities based. And yeah, obviously look at some small caps and some micro caps, as well as blending that with a large portfolio. But yeah, jump on our website, www.armitage.com.au and have a look.
Awesome, mate. Thanks very much for starting 2023 off with a bang.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, mate.
This episode of Talk Your Book was proudly brought to you by Honan, who go beyond a transactional insurance broker to deliver better outcomes for their clients. If you're enjoying Talk Your Book, make sure you subscribe to Chris Judd Invest.